If we go down a path in this next year where we turn all of these constitutional questions over to Democrats, to these particular Democrats, you are signing away, you are voting away the constitutional order that has made the American Republic the greatest political institution in the history of the world over the last two centuries. I'm Dr. Duke, and this is Constitution Corner. And so we are in, I think, a very important period for the American Constitution. We are about exactly 1 year away from the next presidential election. And even more important than who we elect, even whether it's Donald Trump or one of the Democrat candidates, that's a very important thing right now. But perhaps even more important, this is going to have to be the year of the Constitution. Because for the first time really in 250 years, we have a plethora, a majority of Democrat candidates running for president, almost any one of the frontrunners, who by their own admission are going to use their presidency to weaken constitutional values. They're going to undermine the First Amendment. We have these candidates talking about hate speech. We have an unfortunate situation in this country right now where about 50% of millennials, roughly 1 in 2 millennials, according to a recent survey, think that the First Amendment is too easy on speech. About half of millennials, we're talking people from about 23 to 38 years old, about half of those millennials would gladly rewrite the Constitution to make certain kinds of speech illegal. That is a huge constitutional issue that is facing us. We've already talked about how all the major players in the Democrat Party, particularly the presidential candidates, are gung-ho to come after your guns to undermine the Second Amendment. A number of the frontrunners have also called out religious freedom. That religious freedom and freedom of conscience should not allow people to quote-unquote discriminate when it comes to how you're forced to teach kids or abortion rights for that matter. And so there are so many issues on the table today that this next year could go a long way to deciding, whether or not we have borders. We have an entire Democrat presidential campaign group, 10, whether you're talking at all 20 of them or 10 of them or 5 of them or the 3 or 4 frontrunners, who seem to be committed to a policy of open borders, a policy whereby one of the few things that the Constitution says the federal government has a right and a responsibility to do. You read the Constitution, you will find out that the federal government is granted very, very limited rights and responsibilities. One of those important rights and responsibilities is the right to defend our borders. By law, the federal government must defend our borders against attack, against invasion, against intrusion. We have to have a serious border policy. We have to monitor who comes here and when. No one is saying we need to end immigration. We're saying we have to regulate and use our federal oversight as the Constitution calls for. If we go down a path in this next year where we turn all of these constitutional questions over to Democrats, to these particular Democrats, you are signing away, you are voting away the constitutional order that has made the American Republic the greatest political institution in the history of the world over the last two centuries. And it is not an understatement to point this out, right? We need to stress this again and again. And if you need to look no further, how about the constitutional question of whether this impeachment process that is now ongoing is even constitutional the way it's being conducted behind closed doors, being conducted by freezing out one full political party, the Republicans, being conducted on hearsay. The conflict of interest between those few people who we know have testified and their ties to previous Democrat governors, donorships to the Democrat politicians, donorships to liberal causes, the way that they have teamed up with some of these countries, their long-standing ties to some of these countries from which the complaints are coming. This is a very dangerous time for the Constitution. 1 year from now, we're going to decide. And you may have Donald Trump, you may have Bernie Sanders, you may have Elizabeth Warren, you may have Joe Biden. But what we're going to ask ourselves is this. In 1 year's time, will we still have the Constitution of the United States? Will we still see it for what it's worth? And if we go ahead and elect anti-constitutional Democrats in 2020, here's a question. What's going to happen to the Supreme Court? What's going to happen to the new justices that get placed on that really important Supreme Court? we're going to be appointing, if you appoint the people who want to attack our Constitution, who are telling you as Democrat runners for president that they will undermine the Constitution on 6, 7, 8, 10 different issues, you know what's going to happen to the Supreme Court. They are going to promote to the Supreme Court jurists and justices who think the Constitution gets in the way of internationalizing our legal system. People who are not going to see the Constitution as a benchmark against which they make cases. Think about what's going on with the Sotomayars, right, and the Ruth Bader Ginsburgs, and imagine 2 or 3 more of those. Can the U.S. Constitution survive that kind of an onslaught against liberty? We really are in a brave new world here. For the first time in American history, the preponderance of the Democrat candidates are telling you they will do away with your Constitution. They will undermine it. They will broaden its definitions. They will disregard it in their legal cases. They will wage war on it when it comes to progressive talking points, including globalism, borderlessness, the confiscation of your guns, and the limiting of your free speech. You got to honor the Constitution by understanding it. You got to do it for this next year. I'm Dr. Duke, and this has been the Constitution Corner.